Guys, welcome back. In the last episode, Jae-min found a mysterious photograph, and when he returned it to Jiho, the mysterious photographer across the street, Jiho looked terrified and told him he thought the photograph was gone. Now Jae-min started noticing things he probably shouldn't. So yeah, whatever Jiho has been hiding, Jae-min is apparently standing right in the middle of it. So heck yeah, let's get into it.
The morning came gray and soft, the kind of light that filtered through my thin curtains and made everything look slightly out of focus. I woke to the familiar thought of dough being worked 2 floors below, the sound so constant now that it had become a part of my body's rhythm. For a long moment, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant rumble of a delivery truck and the first tentative chirps of sparrows on the windowsill. Then I remembered, because I thought it was gone. The words surfaced in my mind like something rising from deep water. I sat up slowly, pressing the heels of my hands against my eyes. The room was cold. My phone showed 6:47. I had slept poorly, but not in the way that leaves you exhausted, more like the way that leaves you hollow, as if sleep had passed through you without ever truly settling. I made coffee. The machine sputtered and hissed. I stood at the tiny kitchen window, watching the street below begin to stir. A woman walked a small dog. A man in a delivery uniform stacked crates outside the convenience store. The bakery's metal trays clattered. Everything was ordinary. Everything was the same as it had been the morning before, and the morning before that. I tried to tell myself that the previous night meant nothing, that Jiho's past wasn't my business, that I had simply returned a photograph to its owner, and the owner had reacted strangely, and that was the end of it. I repeated the thought while I dressed. I repeated it while I drank my coffee. I repeated it while I walked down the stairs, past the bakery, and into the cool morning air. But when I reached the bookstore and looked across the street, I stopped. The studio was already open. That wasn't unusual. Jiho opened at almost exactly the same time every day. But something about the way the glass door was propped slightly ajar, the way the interior lights were already on, felt different. And then I saw him. He was standing behind the front window, not moving, not arranging anything, just standing there, facing the street, facing the bookstore, facing me. Our eyes met. The distance between us was only a few car widths, but it felt like an ocean. I couldn't read his expression. It was too far, too shadowed by the morning light, but I could feel the weight of his gaze. Neither of us waved. Neither of us smiled. We just stood there, two figures on opposite sides of a quiet street, held in a moment that stretched far longer than it should have. Then Jiho reached up and pulled the studio curtain closed. The fabric swayed for a moment, then settled. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hand was still on the bookstore key, the metal cold against my fingers. I turned away, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The rest of the morning passed in fragments. Customers came and went. I recommended a novel to a young woman who said she wanted something quiet but meaningful. I organized the poetry shelf, alphabetized a stack of used paperbacks. The bakery owner stopped by with a fresh roll and a small container of soup she insisted I try. "You look tired," she said, her eyes kind. I thanked her and ate at the counter, picking at the bread while my eyes kept drifting to the window. The curtain across the street stayed closed. At lunchtime, I found myself in the photography section. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I saw it. An old hardcover book, its spine faded, titled Forgotten Stations, Railway, Architecture of the Post-War Era. I pulled it from the shelf and sat on the floor, flipping through the pages. The photographs were grainy, black and white, filled with long shadows and empty platforms. And then I found it, the same station. I knew it immediately. The curved roof, the pattern of tiles on the platform, the dark mouth of the tunnel at the far end. It was the same place from the photograph, the one that had been left on my counter, the one that had made Jiho's face change in the rain. But this photograph was different. It was older. The edges were yellowed, and above the platform, in the corner of the frame, there was a clock. I looked at the photograph Jiho had taken, the one I had held in my hands, the one I could still see when I closed my eyes. There was no clock in it, just empty space where the clock should have been. I stared at the two images side by side, my heart beating a little too fast. The station was the same. The architecture was unmistakable, but the photographs had been taken years apart. The clock had been removed somewhere in between. Jiho had been there more than once. He had returned. I was still sitting on the floor when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up. Jiho stood in the doorway, one hand on the doorframe, his eyes scanning the store. When he saw me on the floor, surrounded by open books, he paused. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or wariness. I scrambled to my feet, shoving the book behind the counter as casually as I could manage. But I knew he'd seen it. The cover was too distinctive, the title too telling. He walked slowly toward the photography section, the same path he always took. But this time, his movements were less relaxed. His shoulders were tense, his hands were shoved deep into his jacket pockets. I didn't hide my curiosity. I watched him openly, not looking away when he glanced in my direction. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was different from before, not comfortable, not exactly hostile, but charged with something unspoken. Do you photograph old railway stations often? I asked. The words came out quietly, but they landed heavily. Jiho's hand stopped on the spine of a book. He didn't turn around.
This saw a quick pause. Okay, that's already suspicious as hell. Yesterday, this man was avoiding eye contact, and now he's standing there staring at Jae-min like he's waiting for something. Sir, pick up a personality. And when Jae-min finds a railway book, and of course, Jae-min finds the exact station from the photograph because apparently curiosity is stronger than common sense in this story.
Not anymore, he said. I waited. The clock above the door ticked. Somewhere outside, a bus hissed to a stop. Why? I asked. He pulled a magazine from the shelf, studied its cover with more attention than it deserved. Then he turned his head slightly, not quite looking at me. Some places are better left photographed than visited. I didn't understand. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning I couldn't reach. Jiho walked to the counter and placed the magazine down. This time, when his eyes fell on the railway book I had tried to hide, he didn't look away. His expression shifted subtle, controlled, but I saw the tightening around his mouth. Where did you find that? He asked. His voice was quieter now, softer, but there was something underneath it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Back section, I said. It's been there for a while. I think I just never noticed it. Jiho stared at the book. His fingers rested on the counter, inches from the cover. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he said, very quietly, "Don't go looking for that station." I blinked. What? He picked up his magazine and turned toward the door. The one in the photograph? Don't go looking for it. He left before I could respond. The bell chimed once, sharp and final, through the window. I watched him cross the street, his stride steady, his head bowed slightly against the wind. The curtain of his studio remained closed for the rest of the afternoon, but I didn't stop thinking about the photograph. I didn't stop thinking about the missing clock, and I didn't stop thinking about the look in Jiho's eyes when he told me not to go looking for that station. He wasn't just uncomfortable with his past, he was afraid of it. The day softened into evening. I closed the bookstore at 6, locking the register and flicking off the lights. The bakery was still warm when I stepped inside, the smell of fresh bread wrapping around me like a blanket. I bought a roll and a small carton of milk, the same thing I always got. But when I turned to leave, I saw Jiho through the bakery's front window. He was standing at the edge of the street, camera raised, photographing the crosswalk. The light was golden now, the kind that made even ordinary things look significant. I stepped outside, and he lowered his camera. Our eyes met. He didn't smile, didn't wave, but he didn't look away either. For a moment, we just stood there, the street between us, the evening settling around our shoulders like a soft coat. Then he turned and walked back toward his studio. The next morning, I found a cup of coffee sitting on the step outside the bookstore. It was still warm, black, no sugar. I looked across the street. The studio door was open, the light already on. Jiho was nowhere in sight, but I knew. I picked up the cup, wrapped my hands around it, and took a sip. It was exactly how I imagined he drank it. Later that afternoon, I noticed the sign above the bookstore was loose. It had been rattling in the wind for weeks, but I had never done anything about it. When I stepped outside to take a look, it was already fixed. The screws were tight, the metal gleamed. I looked across the street. Jiho was standing outside his studio, cleaning his camera lens. He didn't look up, but I saw the faintest curve at the corner of his mouth. That evening, I found a book I'd left in the bakery, sitting on the counter of the bookstore. I didn't remember bringing it back. The bakery owner didn't know how it had gotten there, but I noticed the way it was placed deliberately with the cover facing out. When did he start noticing me? I closed the store later than usual that night. The sky had deepened to a bruised purple, and the streetlights flickered on one by one. I stepped outside, ready to head home, when I saw him. Jiho was sitting on the low wall outside his studio. He wasn't photographing anything. He wasn't cleaning anything. He was just sitting there, his hands clasped loosely in his lap, his eyes on the empty street. I stood there for a moment, unsure. Then I crossed the street. I sat down a few feet away from him, leaving space between us. Neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people have been circling each other long enough that words feel unnecessary. A bicycle passed, its bell ringing softly. A cat padded across the sidewalk and disappeared into an alley. Finally, I asked, "Were you waiting for someone at that station?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them. I regretted them instantly. Jiho didn't move. He didn't look at me. His hands tightened slightly in his lap, but that was all. I started to get up. Sorry, I shouldn't have. Yes. The words stopped me cold. I sank back down onto the wall. Jiho still wasn't looking at me. His gaze was fixed on something in the distance, something I couldn't see. His voice, when he spoke again, was quiet and even. Years ago, he said, someone important to me promised they would meet me at that station. I waited all day. They never came. I went back the next day, and the next. Eventually, I stopped going. I didn't ask who. I didn't ask what happened after. I just sat there, letting the words settle into the space between us. After that day, he said, I stopped believing people when they said they would come back. The street was quiet. The streetlights hummed. Somewhere far away, a train horn sounded, low and mournful. Then I said, very softly,
So another quick pause. I'm actually starting to like this. He's not saying much, but he's clearly paying attention to Jae-min. And honestly, these tiny gestures are more interesting than some random love confession. Looking at these two finally sitting together without one of them running away, we are making progress, guys. And there it is. The first real piece of Jiho past. Someone promised to meet him there, never came, and apparently that one day changed him completely.
then I'm glad you didn't wait forever. Jiho turned to look at me. For a long moment, his face was unreadable. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted, just slightly, just enough to change the shape of his whole face. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but it was close. The next morning, I found a photograph slipped beneath the bookstore door. I bent down to pick it up, my fingers already knowing what it would be before I turned it over. It was a photograph of the street, the bookstore, the bakery, the photography studio, all three buildings, side by side, captured in the soft light of early morning. The composition was perfect, not staged, but alive. It was the kind of photograph that made you feel something without knowing why. On the back, in the same neat handwriting I had seen before, was a short message. You said you liked quiet mornings. I looked up. Across the street, Jiho was standing outside his studio. His camera hung from a strap around his neck. He was watching me. I raised the photograph, holding it up so he could see. He nodded once. A small, deliberate movement. No dialogue, no wave. But this time, I smiled first. That evening, I closed the bookstore alone. The sky was already dark, the streetlights pooling gold on the wet pavement. I was about to lock the door when I noticed something on the floor. Another photograph. I picked it up. My heart stopped. It was the same train platform. The same long shadows, the same curved roof, the same empty tracks. But this photograph was different, because this time, there was a figure in the frame. It was me. I was standing outside the bookstore. The photograph had been taken that morning from across the street. I could see the bakery sign, the edge of my jacket, the way I was holding the photograph Jiho had given me. My face was partially turned away, but it was unmistakably me. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in the same handwriting, but this time, not Jiho's were the words, "He looks like you." The world tilted. I stood there in the empty bookstore, the photograph trembling in my hand, my breath caught in my throat. I looked across the street. Jiho was already standing outside his studio. He wasn't moving. He wasn't holding a camera. He was just standing there, staring at me, and even from across the street, even in the dim glow of the streetlights, I could see it clearly. He looked genuinely terrified. The photograph slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor. Neither of us moved. The street between us had never felt so wide, and somewhere in the dark, I could have sworn I heard the distant sound of a train.
Okay, so that's where our episode 2 ends. Honestly, this episode gave us more question than answer. But I think that's exactly what makes this story so interesting as hell. What I like up most is that Jae-min and Jiho are suddenly feeling like falling in love just because they are the two main characters. Their relationship is still awkward. They're still figuring each other out. Jiho barely talks while Jae-min is basically doing detective work every time someone tells him not to be so curious. But we are starting to see Jiho's softer side. The coffee, the repaired sign, the book being returned, and finally the photograph he leaves, especially for Jae-min. Those moments tell us Jiho is paying attention even if he isn't ready to admit why. But the mystery is what really has me questioning everything, because originally I thought the photograph was simply connected to someone from Jiho's past. Then we learned about the railway station, then we learned about that someone had promised to meet Jiho there and never came. And now we have a photograph of Jae-min with the message, "He looks like you." That's a completely different situation here, because whoever wrote that message isn't talking about Jae-min as just some random person anymore. They are comparing him to someone, and Jiho's reaction make it pretty damn obvious that he knows who that person is. So now I'm wondering if Jaemin's own past is connected to Jiho somehow. Like there can be a connection. Maybe Jae-min has forgotten something. Maybe Jiho recognized something about him. Or maybe there's someone from their past who neither of them has been able to get rid of. And honestly, I don't want the story to reveal that answer too quickly, to be honest. The slow pace is working here because we are giving these little pieces instead of having someone walk into the poster and explain the entire mystery in 5 minutes. No, we don't want that. We get a photograph, a warning, a conversation, another photograph, and finally one terrifying message. That's enough to keep me curious, to be honest, without making the story feel overloaded. But I definitely don't want, like, trust this situation anymore because someone is watching Jaemin Jiho and Jiho knows something, and that railway station really isn't some random location. I know that. So now the biggest question isn't even whether Jaemin and Jiho going to become something more. It's what happened before Jaemin ever meet him. And why does Jaemin look like someone Jiho thought was gone? Because after that final photograph, I have a feeling that like their quiet little street is about to become a lot less quiet. Anyway, tell me what you think in the comments. Who do you think Jamin resembles? And who do you think is taking this photograph? And if you want to see what happened when Jimmy finally start digging into Jiho's past, make sure you don't miss part 3. I'll see you guys in the next one.